Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very delighted to have this opportunity to speak on this topic, the struggle against poverty and neo-colonialism in Africa. And I'd like to express my special thanks to the Socialist Alternative, our sister organization, for making this occasion possible. To those that have been following events in the press, Nigeria has been in the news of recent, but as usual, for the wrong reasons or for the negative, events. The particular issue I'm referring to is around the sentences that have been passed by some Sharia courts on single women that have been sentenced to death, ostensibly for having children outside wedlock. This is the only time, or these are the type of occasions that you get the Western media, to feature on Nigeria or any neo-colonial country for that matter. And that is why I found it very remarkable, that the Socialist Alternative has put up this kind of program. As a matter of fact, today's program is part of a national meetings which have been holding, in a number of campuses. And the planning of this meeting started as early as February this year. And the topic, as I've said, is the struggle against poverty and neo-colonialism in Africa. The advantage of this kind of foresight is that the comrades did not wait until a particular event occurs before they begin to feature on Nigeria and Africa. And I think this is the kind of positive approach we need if we are really interested in tackling the problem of Africa, and the world as a whole. Before I go on, I just like to say that two positive things I have encountered since I came to this country. I've been repeating this, at every meeting I've had cause to speak, but I think I can't be tired. The two are this. One, I've met, a kind of pleasant, unexpected warmth and openness among the ordinary American workers and youth. This is something special for us, particularly if you come from the third world countries, Nigeria. The usual comportments of Americans that we see over there, are the, arrogant, insensitive type, those that comport themselves as if they own the world and nobody else matters. These are the things, the kind of comportment you find among, global capitalist corporations, officials of Shell, Chevron, Texaco, and the likes of them. And, most especially, those working with the embassies. But coming here, even as a socialist, well, I knew, the workers are going to be different, but I must say that I've been, very, very pleased, with what I've met here. This will be my 8th city, that I've visited in the States. And more or less, the response has been the same. Very warm, always willing to assist, wherever, they could. This is something I intend to take back home so that, as I am sure the people of colonial world will have cause to fight America's imperialism, to fight British imperialism, to fight imperialism all over the world. I think it will be very positive for them to always distinguish between the American workers and youth, and the representatives of imperialism. This is the only way I believe positive struggle for change can be effected. Otherwise, we might get trapped into lumping all Americans together. That's what I believe the terrorists that attacked on 9/11 year 2001, did. They didn't make a distinction between the ordinary Americans and the imperialist, forces. Of course, it can be said that the imperialists don't make distinction when they attack the people in the colonial world. But as the English people normally say, two wrongs don't make a right. The second positive impression I've gathered here is, somewhat different. And it has to do with the development, the infrastructural development of this country itself. I'm talking in terms of the road networks, the communications, transportation network, the electricity, telephone system, and all what you have. Of course, I've been to a number of European countries in the past, and I knew what to expect. But looking at America, a continent-like country, I was not actually expecting, what I've seen here. All the states and cities I've visited, are covered with, well-paved roads. I mean, this is something that is stupendous. It's wonderful. Because I come from a country that is big, by African standard. And when you look at the poor state of infrastructural development, you tend to believe maybe the size of the country is too much. That's why we cannot make progress. I've been able to see here that the size of a country has nothing to do with ability to make progress or not. So if you are not making progress, we should be able to, isolate the reasons why progress is not being made. Of course, when I talk of, the stability of electricity, telecommunication here, there are things to take for granted, at least in one sense. But in Nigeria and many third world countries, this is like, this is something else entirely. When you go home in Nigeria from work, you pray that, God, let there be light. Let me find water. Let there be transport. I mean, this is not the same thing here. This is something positive. And I intend to take it back home that, look, a better world is possible. We only have to find what is wrong, what are the causes of our own special backwardness, and what has, to be done to fight that. I think I should just move on briefly, to the topic of the day, which is the struggle against poverty and neo-colonialism in Africa. Well, there's one advantage which people of this part of the world, have. That is, they have access, to a number of informations on the internet, on televisions, on radio, in the newspapers. So I should presume that the question of poverty of Africa at the third world country is something that many of us are quite familiar with. But since the key aspects of my speech is the struggle against poverty, I think it will still be worthwhile, to give concrete examples of this poverty situation, so that we can understand, how to tackle them. It's like wanting a medical treatment. You have to, start from the diagnosis. Otherwise, you may not apply the correct medicine. Now, according to the United Nations Development Program report, which was released on July 27, 2002, the poorest countries, the 27 poorest countries of the world are all Africans. I mean, there is a league of the richest to the poorest, and the entire lowest 27 are all African countries. No any other country from any other continent, come in between the last, 27 poorest countries in Africa. Of the 35 countries classified in the low human development category, 28 are from Africa. Africa accounts for half of world refugees, while a substantial percentage of people who live with HIV/AIDS are all from the continent. 85%, or 225 million, out of 300 million cases of malaria worldwide every year are in Africa. Africa is said today to be owing over $1 trillion to various foreign banks, IMF, and World Bank. I mean, I said, because it is really tragic that Africa is said to be owing the world, particularly the developed world. One, most of these debts were contracted with military dictators, irresponsible governments that had no mandate, no democratic mandate of their own people. Most of these loans were never used for the actual purposes for which they were contracted. But today, the African people are left to carry the burden, of these debts. And again, I said that it's tragic that Africa is said to be owing this $1 trillion. Because when you study the history of Africa, if anybody is to make claims of debt, I think Africa is the one that should make claims from the advanced capitalist country for indemnity. Because if you study the history of Africa from direct slavery to direct colonialism and to the current strangulating neo-colonial arrangements, wherein out of every $1 invested, 20 are taken back. Africa, in reality, does not owe the world. On the contrary, it is the advanced, capitalist world that is owing Africa. Nonetheless, Africa uses, every country of Africa today uses at least between 1/3 to half of our annual GDP to service these fictitious debts. And that tells you, so that when you're talking about poverty, you know why Africa remains trapped in poverty. If a country has to spend annually between 1/3 and 50% of our total, gross domestic product on servicing debt, then what is left, for positive production? And this is how it works. Between 1984 and 1999, the poorest countries of Africa handed over $11 billion in debt service to Western creditors. Africa today still holds more than 3 times our original loans. In case you get dizzy or confused about that, I just give you this figure from Nigeria. Nigeria originally borrowed $12 billion from Paris Club, repaid a sum of $17 billion, but still indebted to the tune of $25 billion to the same Paris Club. It's the usual crooked mathematical manipulations of banks when they work their interests, on debt. You can borrow $100 this year. If you fail to repay it as and when stipulated, the money can suddenly jump to $1,000 without an additional capital. And this is what has been happening. They don't even encourage the continent, to pay the so-called debt, but usually to service the debt so that they remain perpetually in a state of poverty. And now, this is what I've given generally applies to Africa in general. But it will be worthwhile to examine, the negative impacts, of this poverty situation in the continent on a few of the countries. And today I'm going to illustrate, the situation in Africa by making copious reference to the situation in Nigeria. Of course, I intend to make some passing references, to other countries in the continent. The fact I intend to relay now are to be found from the Human Development Reports, a United Nations organ, which was released in August 2002. And so these are some of the heart-rending figures or features of poverty as released by the United Nations itself. It says, and I quote, "Malnutrition is widespread in Nigeria, although daily per capita supplies of calories is above 2,100. But like all other averages, it hides more than it reveals in terms of household food security. 70% of severe and moderate underweight under 5 infant mortality rate is a sad reflection of the acute state of food insecurity." It goes further to say, the poverty situation has become worse. The estimate of the 1998 National Human Development Report that 48.5% of the country's population were living below poverty level has now been revised upward to 70%, with all the different dimensions of poverty and deprivation having become aggravated. It says there is a growing threat to the bare physical survival of the people. Apart from water, food is the most basic input for human survival. In addition, human deprivation, income poverty, and social deprivation have become aggravated. According to United Nations, 70% of Nigerians now live below poverty level. And by United Nations standard, anyone that lives above $1 per day does not fall into that category. So that means over 70% of Nigerians are living on just below $1 per day. I'm sure for anyone from the developed world, it will be unthinkable, but that tells you the kind of nightmare existence of most people in Africa aside the present period in time. Now, it says, the report says in another aspect that the Nigerian universities are producing relatively too many graduates of dubious quality and relevance. Like I've said elsewhere, this is an understatement. Because when you hear this kind of thing, you may have the feeling that, well, majority of people don't get quality education, but some do. There's virtually nobody that gets quality education in Nigeria as of today. The educational systems are virtually collapsed. Name it, from inadequate lecture theaters, non-availability of teaching materials, books, facilities, down to poor payments of teaching staff. As a matter of fact, education at tertiary level has been seriously affected by what is euphemistically called brain drain. And that is a situation where anybody that can find something better to do leaves the country, and teaching only left for those who don't have an alternative. The take-home pay of most academic staff members cannot literally take them home, and that explains why many of them have to leave the country. It's common to find about 1,000 students trying to receive lecture in a lecture theater that was built for 100, 250 students originally. If you have a lecture in Nigeria by 9 a.m. and you want a seat, you have to get there by 6 a.m. because very often you may have to stay for 3-4 hours in the same room receiving different lectures. So you have a choice of either going 3 hours before the lecture to secure a seat, or risk standing for 3-4 hours. Of course, it's not surprising that no meaningful lecture can be given in that kind of situation. I've been to a number of colleges here. I'm amazed at the wonders of technology. I was in one university in Michigan. In the student union building alone, they have over 200 computers, and you can just walk in, make use of them without anybody asking you where you come from. Back home in Nigeria, so-called faculties of computer sciences hardly at any point in time can boast of 10 functional computers, and that does not include email or internet facilities, because mostly there will be no telephone even to run that where it is possible. So that just gives you a glimpse of what happened at the tertiary level. And at the primary high school level, the conditions are even worse. In Nigeria right now, it's only those that are completely hopeless financially that will allow their children to go to the so-called public primary schools. It has virtually collapsed. Sometimes they don't pay the teachers for upward of 9-10 months. And where the teachers bother to go to school at all, they don't bother to teach the pupils. So the working class parents are compelled to patronize one so-called private schools or the other that have little or nothing to offer. But at least you have the psychological satisfaction that somebody is going to take care of the pupils while they are there. And the high school is no worse. The poor payment of the teachers, inadequate facilities, are the norm in all these places. In fact, in many high schools, particularly in cities, it's usual for children the pupils to learn under the trees and what you have. And the health sectors does not fare better. In fact, in the 80s, in 83 precisely, when the military staged one of their usual coups, what they said then, among other reasons, was that they are staging this coup because the health situation in the country has become so bad that the hospitals have become mere consulting clinics. Today, they have graduated from mere consulting clinics to just mortuaries, and sometimes, stinking mortuaries, because there are usually no light even to preserve the dead bodies, whenever this occurs. It is not accidental, again, this background, that the United Nations says 38.8% of Nigerians are not expected to live beyond the age of 40 years. I mean, when you take into account all these varieties of poverty, it's even a miracle how people can live up to 40 years in Nigeria. Because, and let me tell you, when we're talking of poverty, the United Nations' own indices are just what you can call a tip of the iceberg. There are several other aspects of poverty, that can make people to have uncomfortable life. But before I go further, I just like to state that why generally poverty is a pervasive situation, phenomenon in Africa, in Nigeria. I like to highlight especially the poverty situation in the Niger Delta region. Niger Delta region is the oil producing sector of Nigeria. And to those who may not know, Nigeria relies almost totally on crude oil exportation for all its revenue. 80% of total revenues and 90% of government revenue, is derived from exportation of crude oil. Oil exploration in commercial quantity started in Nigeria in 1953. Between that time and now, over $350 billion is said to have been extracted, worth of oil is said to have been extracted from the Niger Delta. But what is given back in Niger Delta? Little or nothing, beyond complete devastation and pollution of the environment. I give you an example of what is happening in one of the states in the Niger Delta, in the state where commercial oil exploration actually started. The state is called Bayelsa State. In Bayelsa State, this is what the governor said, and I'm quoting this from a newspaper called The Vanguard of September 9, year 2002. It says, and I quote, there are, 3/4 of Bayelsa State is water. We have fresh water, blackish water, and salt water. Yet to get drinkable water, you would have to spend so much money. You have to generate your own electricity with the aid of a turbine. Bayelsa State is the only state not connected to the national electricity grid. And it says further, there is mass unemployment because there are no industries in the state. But who is going to cite an industry in a place where there is no light, where accessibility to products is expensive? And it says further, because of the decay in the school system, most of our youth do not have the minimum 5 credits in the ordinary level exams to qualify them for colleges. Most of them are school dropouts. I discovered that little girls of 13, 14 years of age were making babies in the villages. It is pathetic. They can't even look after the babies because they themselves are babies. This is happening in the oil-producing region, where billions worth of oil are being extracted annually. But in their insensitivity, the global capitalist corporations that dominate the oil exploration in Nigeria, Chevron, Texaco, Shell, Total, BP, Ajib, and all the rest, they all, without a single exception, cited their corporate headquarters in a city of Lagos, which is over 1,500 kilometers to the region where oil is being produced. Of course, the natural implication of that is that they are never in a position to even witness, the deprivation, the excruciating poverty which most of the people of the oil-producing areas, are forced to live under. You have to take this against the background that because of the concentration of oil underneath the soil of Niger Delta, the oil exploration activities have polluted the water, despoiled the soil that is not used, it's not possible to carry out useful agricultural enterprise. Head or tail is, the masses of the oil Niger Delta are losers. No jobs, no hospitals, no schools, no roads. And these insensitive global capitalist corporations don't see that anything is wrong with this. When they are confronted with mass protests, by people of the Niger Delta area, or the youth become restive that they kidnap some important oil officials to extract money, the strategy they have come up with is not, to carry out positive development of the area, to calm frayed nerves, but rather to shift the emphasis of oil exploitation from what they call onshore to offshore. Now they are putting the rigs in deep sea beyond the reach of ordinary people, so that even if the people lie, they can go to places, they can protest from now till eternity. The oil rigs are placed in deep sea far beyond their control, and they are rich. And I think they are also calculating that if the situation gets too uncomfortable in Nigeria, they can simply bring the warships, to continue, oil exploitation without anybody being able to, touch them. Another aspect of the poverty in Africa, in Nigeria, that is not often encountered in the United Nations report can be glimpsed from these two examples. Last week, there was a boat disaster in Senegal, resulting in the death of over 1,300 people in just one boat mishap. And according to officials, this is what they said. The officials now say, I accessed this on internet, day before yesterday. Officials now say 1,034 people, nearly double the boat's official capacity, were on the overcrowded state ferry when it overturned in bad weather. This is a concrete manifestation of absolute poverty. Because why should a boat that is supposed to carry less than 500 people in the first instance carry 1,034 people? And that is what happens virtually with all means of transportation in Africa. Cars, buses, trains, people even in Lagos City, for instance, people sometimes, they go on the deck of the train, and so when an accident occurs, this is the kind of thing you get. And hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people die as a result of this in Africa every year. You can't get that in any United Nations data. Another manifestation of this poverty can be glimpsed from this report also. This is from This Day, a Nigerian newspaper of September 30th. It says 20 people were killed in a blazing fire from a burst petroleum product in Akute, in a place in Ogun State. Eyewitness accounts informed that scores of villagers had converged at the spot known as Akute Odo to scoop petrol from the burst pipeline. In Nigeria, the pipelines are laid so close to the surface and they are so old that it periodically bursts open. And because of the excruciating poverty, whenever it happens, people go there to scoop petrol, which they can sell for money. And periodically, thousands of people, get killed. In 1998, for instance, thousands in a village called Jesse in Delta State were killed in the same process. In November 2000, over 60 people were killed in the same process in an area called Tracker Bay in Lagos State. Like I said, most of the points I've made apply to many other African countries. In fact, in other African countries, the situation are even worse. Because when you look at several other factors, Nigeria is even, better placed economically in terms of even little development when you compare it with other African states. But meanwhile, the most developed economy in Africa, that is South Africa. The United Nations report on human development released in August this year says that 70% of South Africans live on between $33 to $35 per month. And that tells you the excruciating degree of poverty, not per day, per month. That's just barely over $1 per day. And yet South Africa is the most developed economy in the entire continent. Another frightening figure can be seen from this. This is on Kenya. It says, and I quote, "Poverty has increased and income inequality and social indicators show worrisome trends. In 2001, the number of Kenyans living below poverty line increased to an estimated 15 million. More than 3/4 of rural and urban poor cannot afford private health care and so depend on public health facilities. Yet, nearly 3/5 of the poor do not even seek public health care because drugs are unavailable. Education indicators are also weak for the poor. 13% of urban poor and 29% of the rural poor have never attended school, and education's high cost is cited as the main reason." You can multiply, add, or do whatever. The figures and features of poverty I've cited in the few countries I've made reference to, and you get the same picture in all other African countries. And I think so, therefore, I would like to move on by posing starkly, bluntly, what are responsible, for this state of unmitigated poverty. Because according to various figures, Africa as a continent is stupendously rich. It can produce enough population to sustain 10 times the current population of Africa. Yet, overwhelming majority of people of Africa today languish in endless poverty. I must say that the basic causes of poverty in Africa and several other third world countries are to be located in the unjust economic system which were imposed on the country at independence. This system is called capitalism. On top of this system, particularly in the past 1 decade and a half, a more ruthless, manifestation of this system has been introduced in the policy generally called neoliberal policies. I say capitalism is the cause in the sense that capitalism is a system that promotes individual. It's too fast. Capitalism is a system that encourages a situation where an individual can own billions while millions have nothing. So right from the beginning, that kind of system is loaded with inherent insoluble problem and contradiction. And in the past 15 years, the problem of capitalism has even been further compounded by the implementation of the most ruthless capitalist policies. These policies are codified under the so-called globalization concept. And the most key aspect of this globalization policies are what they call deregulation, wherein every country should dismantle all form of regulations, trade restrictions. Everybody should be able to buy and sell everywhere. But the problem with this is that for countries of Africa and other third world countries, they are never in a position, to fairly take advantage of this so-called deregulation philosophy. Take Nigeria as an example. If you want to cite an industry in Nigeria, you have to generate your own water, you have to generate your own electricity, you have to organize your own transportation, you have to organize your own telecommunications. At the end of the day, the cost of the goods are so high that it cannot be sold locally because of the mass poverty, and they cannot compete effectively internationally, because of cheaper goods or better qualities that are being produced in an environment that is more stable. So far from helping Africa and Nigeria in particular, these policies, tend to worsen the plight and the conditions of the people. For anyone that has been following the last Washington World Bank IMF meeting, there were even protests by some African leaders against the subsidy of agriculture in the US, because what often happens is that even the areas where these poor countries could have an advantage in the area of direct primary products like cotton, textile, and the rest of them, they are at a disadvantage because the US government keeps subsidizing, agriculture here, whereas they preach the exact opposite of the same philosophy, to the rest of the world. Government is supposed to reduce expenditure on social services, education, healthcare, telecommunications. They must withdraw subsidies from agriculture, from petroleum products, and all the rest. And they practice the exact opposite here in this country. So that is why I feel that if you are talking of solving the problem of Africa on a fundamental basis today, we have to be thinking of a new socio-economic order. The question might be posed that, well, after all, countries like US, Britain, France developed on the basis of capitalism. Why is it not possible for countries of Africa, and the rest, to be able to develop on the basis of capitalism? I must say that the very logic that made it possible for these countries to develop is the same logic that denies development to the countries of Africa. As one revolutionary, Leon Trotsky, put it, the latecomers into capitalist world, they cannot repeat the same experience and experiment, which made it possible for the older generation of capitalist countries, to grow. Now, if you wonder what does that mean, it simply means that there is no longer colonies that these developing countries can go and colonize. In other words, the countries of Great Britain, France, Germany, US, they made lots of their own wealth and development from the ruthless exploitation of the resources and people of the colonial world. You are familiar with the history of slave trade, which went on for almost 300 years. The most able-bodied, the studied, the strongest, were carted, from Africa to develop the agriculture in the US and Europe as a whole. When they finished with that, they went to direct colonialism, wherein the crudest form of exploitation of the raw materials and natural resources of Africa and other third countries were being done, and while they were turned and remained, a dumping ground for the goods manufacturers in the advanced capitalist world. And the same vicious circle remains up to today. So there is no way by which the countries of Africa can develop within the framework of capitalism. The simple reason being that Nigeria, for instance, is rich in steel. But if you want the steel sector to be developed in Nigeria, the America's businessmen will be fearing a competition with the steel produced in America, in Japan, and the fear that the prices will become low in the market. Because capitalism is a system that is geared towards profit and prestige, not the needs of the masses. It's profit that is always constant. They don't go into production to say, let's produce cars to make everybody happy. Let's produce telephone to make everybody happy. They produce, to maintain certain level of profit. And when they have acquired too much than they can do with it, they declare the market as having been glutted. In Nigeria, for the past 1 decade, there's no time when capacity utilization has exceeded 30%. And this is a country that is ravaged by mass poverty. So the question is, why can they not produce up to the fullest of capacity? You see that they have fed every hungry mouth, they have clothed every naked body, they have given education to every illiterate, they have treated every sick person. That is not the case. But capitalism is not interested in that. It's only interested in profit. And that's why we are demanding for a new socio-economic order, wherein the needs of the masses, the basic needs of everybody in society, will be the yardstick of production. And this can only be possible under a socialist planned economy, where the commanding height of the economy are placed under public ownership and planned so that production is for use and not, for profit. Now, I just like to say, because some people may get the feelings that, well, maybe that applies to Nigeria, but that countries like US don't need that kind of thing. I disagree. From the little experience I've been able to gather here, I realize that while there is light, stable light, telephone, roads, decent accommodations, I realize that majority of the working class people have to spend virtually their lifetime just barely struggling, to make ends meet over these things. And this is not supposed to be the case. I read something in yesterday's Financial Times, and it says that it's a wonder that 1/4 of the world is in absolute poverty of the world population. And it says another aspect of the wonder is that the world has sufficient technological and human resources that can abolish poverty in the world. This is the contradiction of capitalism. And this still exists even in the most developed, the richest of the world nations, and that is the United States. It would be nice to ponder over some of these points. For instance, Business Week of April 30, 2001 says, and I quote, homeowners are now loaded up with debt. During the 90s through second mortgages, etc., to a record level of $5.4 trillion. So that means majority of homeowners people that have decent homes today, many of them are able to live in that decent accommodation because they are living on borrowed time. Many of them are on their second mortgages. That does not strike me as a manifestation of a country that is completely healthy economically. Another aspect of that says that this another factor which gives the worrisome nature of the US society itself says that the growth in GDP in the last period, that is 1990-1999, was only 2.6%, whereas during the post-war boom, the growth rate between 1948 and 1953, for instance, was 5.4. Between 1960 and 69 was 4.3, while between 1980 and 1990 was only 2.8. That means even the growth rate is systematically declining. If, when the situation is like this, majority of homeowners, or a good number of homeowners on their second mortgages, if this thing goes down, then you can imagine, what, will happen, at the end of the day. Then it says in another aspect that you can get all this also from Business Week of May 7, year 2001. It says, the collapse in manufacturing industry is reflected in the growing trade deficit. A comparison of the dollar value of goods the U.S. export to other countries compared to how much it imports. The trade deficit with developing nations alone was $170 billion in year 2000. And in another areas, it says that Business Week of the same 5/7 says that by the end of year 2000, the U.S. current account deficit was more than 4 times larger than it was at the end of 1995, and had grown to a record 4.6% of GDP. These are manifestations of organic disease, afflicting the U.S. economy and society itself. Another major worrisome data of capitalism as concerns the U.S. is this. It says, and I quote, that the wealthiest 1% of households now controls 40% of total wealth. The bottom 40% of households control only 0.2%. So that even in this wonderland, you can now see the reason why majority of people can only barely struggle to survive on the basic, essentials of life, because just 1% of the populace control between themselves 40% of wealth. And that should not be a surprise if one individual in the name of Mr. Bill Gates can have over $100 billion. Then what do you expect? So by the time they multiply people like Bill Gates and the rest, they constitute about 1% of the population, but they control over 40% of the total wealth of the household, wealth. Another worrisome aspect of the U.S. society, which should give any serious thinking person, food for thought, is to be found in the regimentation of not only social inequality, but racial inequality. In 1992, 92.6% of those convicted for crimes involving crack cocaine were African American, and 4.7% were white. However, a U.S. Sentencing Commission survey found that 65% of all crack users were white. The racist drug laws are also behind the majority of cases of harassment of youth and the policies of racial profiling. These are dynamite, and these are unnecessary. The world, as at the moment, has enough sufficient technological progress, human resources, and technique that can banish poverty, hunger, discrimination from the surface of earth. But as long as capitalism as a system remains internationally, it will be it will be a war of problems, world of wars. If it is not against Iraq, it will be against North Korea. Maybe it will go back to Pakistan, who is the friend and darling of the U.S. imperialism today, just as Iraq itself was the client of imperialism, 8 years earlier. In order to round up, I'd like to pose the question: is change possible? Given the myriad of problems which I've enumerated, given the stranglehold of imperialism on the world's economic situations, particularly those of the third world countries, I must say that change is possible. It's possible to have a better world, a world free of religious and ethnic strifes as we have in Africa today. In Nigeria, in the past 4 years alone, in the past 3 years alone, over 20,000 people have been killed as a result of one ethnic or religious strife. not to talk of millions that have been displaced. So the reason, as I've enumerated before, is caused by poverty. And I want to believe that a better world is possible. I will use Nigeria as an example. Virtually all occasions in the recent period, in contemporary times, Nigerians can never be found united around any topic whatsoever, with the exception of one subject, soccer. When the Nigerian national team is playing soccer, then that is the only time you can see Nigerians exhibiting complete, undivided patriotism. Everybody wants the Super Eagles to win. As soon as the football match, as we call it in Nigeria, is over, it's to your tents, O Israel. Everybody to himself or herself. Now, the only other exception, which I think is more fundamental, is when the working class, come up with concrete agenda. In the past 3 years, the Nigerian Labour Congress, the Trade Union Federation Organization, has organized 2 successful general strikes around a protest against increases in the prices of petroleum products. What happened in year 2000 and year 2002 was that the government increases the prices of petroleum products, diesel, petrol, gas, kerosene. And most people cannot see why this has to be the case. Nigeria is the 6th largest oil exporting country in the OPEC community. But government keeps on saying that it subsidizes the petroleum product. So which of course does not go down well with people. That why can you say that you subsidize things that is produced, extracted from Nigeria's soil, a gift of nature? Then again, there is the other worrisome aspect. Whenever the prices of petroleum products are increased, the prices of all other things, goods and services, automatically, will go up. It's standard, because there is no stable electricity, there is no functional roads. So every time the prices go up, the transporters will increase their fares. Companies will increase the prices of their goods, because most of them are run on separate generators with, the tons of diesel oil and the rest like that. So this is usually a touchy issue. The Nigerian Labour Congress therefore organized strikes on the 2 occasions, and these strikes were absolutely and marvelously supported by the working masses across the country. This shows that change is possible. The question is to identify the correct social forces that is capable of effecting this change and working towards its victory. But I must say, however, that while the labor movement has shown the potential to unite Nigeria, which is not a mean achievement, because this is a country that most of the time is divided along ethnic, religious, and whatever. Even within the same nationality, people disagree from one local government or borough to the other. But remarkably, whenever the labor movement comes up with any concrete issue, either in defense of minimum wage or against increments of petroleum products, it always received marvelous support. This shows that it is possible to unite the people of Nigeria. It is possible to keep Nigeria as a corporate entity. But that can only be done if the labor movement itself has correct ideological and strategies, to change society. Unfortunately, the labor movement does not seem to have that now. And that is because all their strategies, all their struggles are placed within the framework of making capitalism to work. They struggle for minimum wage, not just to better the conditions of today by linking that struggle with overall change of the system, but with an utopian perspective that workers can be made to get sufficient minimum wage within the framework of capitalism. And what often happens is that once minimum wages are increased, prices of goods and services are increased, because these are variables that are not under the control of the working class. Again, while they have been constantly struggling against the deregulation of the oil sector, the labor leaders themselves say they support the deregulation, privatization of the electricity board, telecommunications, and all other key sectors of the economy. This is a contradiction. As I pointed out, all these entities, when they are privatized, contrary to the preachment of World Bank and IMF, they do not necessarily mean better services Even where they meet better services, it usually means better services for a much more reduced section of the population and leaving the majority in the state of absolute poverty. This is no progress. What Africa and many other countries need is massive expansions of road constructions, schools, hospitals, jobs, not the opposite. What the IMF and World Bank advocate is the exact opposite of what is actually needed. Reduction of social services, reduction of healthcare, spending, education, and when these things happen, the purchasing power of the country becomes so low that even the industrial development becomes impossible. And that's why when you go to Nigeria today, most of the multinational corporations that were in manufacturing industry before, they are pack up business, and all they do where they remain is just to import goods that were produced from their sisters, corporations and things like that. Then, to change the society too, it's possible to change society if we have the correct orientation, therefore. And one of the basic things that people of Africa, the world, need to fight for is the development of a mass revolutionary party of the workers, youth, peasants in the colonial world. In the advanced capitalist world, a mass revolutionary workers party. Look at the US. I've been following the debate on the Iraq war since I came here, and I tend to be confused between the positions of the Republicans and the Democrats. In most cases, I can hardly make any distinction. This is worrisome, because sometimes when you read the Democrats, what they just say is not so much a condemnation of the fundamental strategies of the Republicans, but that they say, well, maybe you should have put it this way. I can't see any positive way forward, for the workers and youth in the US, as long as these two main parties dominate the setting. It's the same thing that we are confronted with in Africa. In Nigeria today, there are 6 political parties. And when I say 6 political parties, these are legalized, authorized parties. In Nigeria, you cannot just run any political party of your choice, even though the Constitution says so. But those in powers have always ensured they sabotage that. When the chairperson introduced me the other time as the chairperson of the National Consensus Party, which he describes as the main opposition party in Lagos, I think I must give an explanation. It's the main opposition in the sense that it is the only party that is opposed to the anti-poor, pro-rich manifestos of the other political parties. Apart from that, it is not regarded as a political party by Nigerian context, because it has not been given the permission to field candidates. Whereas all the rest political parties, they subscribe to the same negative neoliberal policies of privatization, of deregulation, of mass poverty. And only the NCP, for instance, is opposed to mass retrenchment as a solution to problems. The NCP says that you have to give jobs to everybody. Everybody must be educated. When you educate people, you are not doing them favor, because it is the level of educational quality and development of citizens that determine the overall development of societies. But imperialists and capitalists all over the world, they regard education as a privilege that should only be given, to those that are rich. Now, I said, and I still maintain, change is possible. And this is on the point I'm going to round up. In 1993, during the military era, they did what they call the transitional program, wherein it's a program of disengagement. But they call it a democratization program, but it's the exact opposite of the word democracy, because they formed the political parties themselves, built offices for them, wrote their manifestos and constitution, appointed their leaders. At the end of the day, election was held. They were not satisfied. They still wanted to remain in power. They annulled the election. We, our organization in Nigeria, the Democratic Socialist Movement, we were called Labour Militant then. We were working in a pro-democracy movement, just like you have anti-war coalition here. And we went into that movement, which was a movement of very few pro-democracy individuals, middle-class elements, and ourselves, who are very numerically small. And we went into that body and demanded that let us have a protest. The leadership wanted what they call Democracy Night Fiji, where people would light candles and just move around in the street at night as if it were money. And we demanded that, no, don't let us do that. Let's carry out an open protest, even if it is 50, if it is 100 people. And I must tell you what happened later dramatically changed the face of the political landscape of Nigeria. Ultimately, the leadership accepted to carry out a protest. A day before the protest started, they asked, we at least expect 5,000 people to come out. The following day, in the city alone, in Lagos City alone, over 350,000 people were on the street of Lagos demonstrating, with millions standing in front of their homes in support of the struggle. And that was the pattern in many other cities. And that dramatically changed the landscape. And it's the same thing I advise and advocate here now. The reactionary government of Bush and their twin brothers in the Democrats, they will not mind to plunge the world into war. They will not mind to go and wage war against the innocent, defenseless people of Iraq, if not checkmated. And a lot can be done by our own little activities. And that, in fact, convinced me that if we fight, we can win, whereas if we don't, we may lose. The problem, however, is this. People have asked me several times, and I think I must just address this, that, well, against the picture I painted, do I think that the struggle for change will be very easy? Never. The struggle for change will never be easy, and it has never been easy for us. Many activists have been killed in Nigeria. Many are retrenched from their jobs. For instance, in Lagos State, our own comrade, who is a member of the organization, was at the same time the chairman of the Public Sectors Workers Union. In the year 2000, the Labour Federation negotiated a new minimum wage with the federal government. When they approached their state governor and government for the implementation, the government refused to carry out this implementation. And the workers, under the leadership of our comrades, were forced to organize a strike, a public strike which lasted for 21 days. At the end of the strike, the government was forced to agree to pay some percentage of increment, not even the total increment which they were demanding for. Because the government says that if you have to pay this total increment, we have to retrench workers. So the workers decided to sign an agreement on what the government said it was going to pay. A week after the government signed that agreement, it rolled out retrenchment letters. In the process, about 15,000 workers were laid off, with a special emphasis on those who played the role, the most prominent role, during the struggles, for the implementation of minimum wage. As a result of that now, scores of our comrades have been retrenched. They have not served the number of years they are expected to serve in public service. They did not commit any crime. They did not violate the civil service rule, but they have all been sacked. All the government just did was to look at the videotapes of those that were most focal at the protest, and they were all sacked. Routinely, students in colleges are expelled from colleges for the simple crime that they are fighting, for better conditions. These are the kind of problems and the challenges that activists and people, revolutionaries like myself that are struggling for change in Africa, in Nigeria, are confronted with. But we have come to a conclusion that there is no alternative for us. Every other alternative is more destructive, more expensive, and less rewarding. Those that are not in the kind of frame of mind as ourselves to struggle for better life are either engaged in one form of negative activities, crime, prostitution, drug pushing. And all these have been seen to even be much more negative, for the working masses overall. So we have resolved, that what we will continue to do is to struggle, for a mass change, through a workers' and peasants' socialist revolution. I thank you for listening to me. And as a result, in order to encourage us in this struggle, I appeal to you to generously donate whatever you are capable of donating to us in order to sustain, the struggle against all odds which we are waging in Nigeria, in Africa as a whole. Thank you very much. I like to say that once a country is indebted to the World Bank, IMF, it's in a trap. There is no getting out of it within the framework of capitalism. The way it operates internationally is that unless you keep on servicing your debt, they will not guarantee your payments and purchase of goods internationally, which is usually not done on cash and carry basis. So they give you the guarantee, they give what they call a warranty that, well, they can continue trading with you. So if you refuse to do that, then the economy can be brought to a complete grant. So that's why it's a kind of vicious circle. And I guess that they are not interested in even the repayment of this capital, because the World Bank and IMF have turned out to be very important instruments of neo-colonialism. They actually use this debt to keep the colonial people in bondage. So there is only one alternative, a revolutionary overthrow of the system, which, among other things, will abrogate or repudiate this fictitious debt, and possibly only payments or repayment will be made on the basis of actual needs. If, for instance, any country is owing the Bill Gates of this world, I don't see why they should pay that kind of debt, because if anything is the Bill Gates of this world that are owing the people, it's not the other way. It's not possible. What work does he do? Is it mental or physical that you are able to accumulate $100 billion? That will only have been stolen, from the labor, the unpaid labor of others. So this debt can only be repudiated. But that brings me to the second question asked by my sister, or raised, the question of corruption of the elite. I've had cause to explain that in several other speeches I've given in the States here, but today I was under pressure of time. Now, the problem is that when we advocate socialist transformation of this society, it's not just against imperialism, it's against capitalism. And capitalism presently has two legs in colonial world. You have the local bourgeois and then the imperialist backers. In the scheme of things, the imperialism dominates the economy. But the local bourgeois also plays a role. If you come to Nigeria, for instance, Shell, Chevron, Texaco, Mobil, all these global capitalist corporations owned by other America, French imperialism, Dutch imperialism, you can hardly find any of them headed by a Dutch name or an American name. You find a chief, an alhaji, a pastor from Nigeria, as the chairman, board of corporations. These are colleagues in crime with imperialism. And the credit they get for that is that they are giving loads of money. So that's why you find some, from these poverty-stricken countries, you find individuals that are stinkingly rich as any capitalist element in the West. So these people have as much stake in the preservation of the colonial order as the imperialists themselves. Because the figures of poverty which I've given is just one aspect, one side of the picture. In Nigeria, as terrible as things are, you find that there are some Nigerians that can afford the latest state-of-art cars, which you find in the advanced capitalist countries, which even here, many upper middle class people cannot ride. So, but that number of people constitute a very tiny proportion of the population. But they are heavily backed, by imperialist forces. Look at what is happening in Côte d'Ivoire now. There is a revolt. And if you read the stories from the beginning, it's the usual mass poverty. They got to a point where they cannot even pay the soldiers, who by nature are the custodian of capitalist states. And those ones revolted. But all the African leaders, particularly in the West, they are pledging to send troops there, not to defend the masses, but to support their colleague. Because it's very clear, president like Obasanjo in Nigeria and all the rest corrupt pro-capitalist ones, they are threatened by that kind of revolt, and they have to go there to restore law and order for corruption to continue. I want to say, however, that it is possible to effect a change. The thing that has been missing is correct identification, of what has to be done. And that is partly compounded by the collapse of the former Soviet Union economy. The former Soviet Union was a kind of what you can call a distorted socialist state. And organizations like our own were pointing out that for decades, one of the leading elements of the revolution in person of Leon Trotsky was saying that the kind of structure that was being built in Soviet Union is bound to collapse at a certain point, because it is based on a contradictory basis. On the one hand, the economy was publicly owned, but its management was being done in a bureaucratic, unaccountable manner, which made it possible for massive corruption and mismanagement to take place. But while it even lasted, and this one shows the superiority of public ownership planned economy over capitalism, it made possible certain achievements. There was no unemployment in Soviet Union until the society went back to capitalism. You can't find official prostitution. Everybody had accommodation. Education was free. Russia itself was as backward as India today compared with Europe by the time it made revolution in 1917. But within a period of 50 years, Russia developed to the second most powerful country in the world. In fact, the first successful space exploration to the moon was carried out in Russia. That shows the inherent strength of planned economy. But in the absence of workers, democratic control and management, that thing became a disaster. But the point I was making is that in Africa before, it was easy for African people to see that there was an alternative. And the alternative was usually seen in the context of socialism, because people were being given statistics of no unemployment in Soviet Union, in Eastern Europe. But when that society, bureaucratic society collapsed, that tends to give the impression, it gave a kind of ideological weapon to the bourgeois to argue that there is no alternative to the market madness. And that is what has temporarily, strengthened imperialism. But the world and processes move in a dialectical manner. This kind of siege that there is no alternative is exhausting itself. And that is why you see increasing struggles of workers in Zimbabwe, even in South Africa, in Nigeria, against IMF, World Bank, protests. And it can be seen from the anti-global capitalist corporations protest in Seattle here in 1999, in Italy in the year 2001, and a host of other places. At this stage, the movement is about what they don't want. It is not about what they want. But organizations like our own can play a crucial role by spreading the necessary ideological socialist consciousness that it is not just what is wrong, but what has to replace it. I've seen it. I've come from a country where general strike paralyzes the whole country. And when you say general strike, it's like insurrectionary movement. Nothing moves. Cars do not move. The youth converted the roads into soccer playing fields, which tells you how absolutely the strike is successful. But in the absence of a clear-cut revolutionary movement of the working people with correct program, the ruling class will regain initiatives. What they simply did was to stop going to offices for 3 days. They'll be phoning, looking from their windows. Is it safe to come out? Then after 3 days, they come back and regain the initiatives. That is because the masses at this moment do not have the necessary ideological weapon, the revolutionary party needed to effect this kind of change. And that will be built in the coming period, both internationally, in Africa. There's no basis to lose confidence, because there's one thing that is constant about humanity. The chart is always towards progress. Fascism may come at a time to obstruct that thing. Capitalism may derail it. But when you look at the curve of humanity, from Stone Age to the present period, there is the constant search for progress, for perfection. And there is no reason whatsoever to believe that humanity has exhausted that. As a matter of fact, humanity has never been better placed than today. Unlike other times in history, we have stupendous technological, inexhaustible human resources to make the world a wonderful place. But the struggle to begin that is the struggle to create a revolutionary movement, the struggle to create a working people's party, that is built on socialism. And that is what we are trying to do in Nigeria, for instance, with the creation of National Conscience Party. And that is why the ruling class made it impossible at this stage to give official sanction, to that kind of party. They erected all sorts of impossible barriers. You can't believe them in the name of democracy. To form a party in Nigeria, you have to have offices in 2/3 of Nigerian states. There are 36 states. That means you have to have offices in 36 states. You have to have 24 members of your National Executive Council come from 24 of the states, which is 2/3 of the state. Then they say that even if you are able to fulfill that, you have to put furniture, computers in all these offices. If you are able to do that, you have to go into an elections. And you must win 1/3 of the votes in local government elections before you proceed to other. If you look at the history of democracy all over the world, where is that done? The oldest the oldest party in the world today possibly will be the British Conservative Party. I'm sure the party will have possibly less than 300,000 registered members. But in Nigeria, they want a party that is being formed today to have 1 million, 10 million people. The National Consensus Party has a membership of 500,000 people paid up. They pay to obtain the form. For the ruling class in Nigeria, that kind of party cannot be registered. Why? Because it's a party that stands opposed to corruption, stands opposed to massive retrenchment, demands public investment on housing, education, healthcare. And the logic is clear. If most of the resources of the society is spent on education, on healthcare, and the rest of that, there will be little left for these looters to loot. And that is their problem. And that is why the revolution in Africa would have to be against imperialism and their imperialist backers. So I think there is no need for pessimism. But like I've said, the road will be very rough. They will kill, they will jail, they will maim. But there is a saying, you can fool some people all the time. You cannot fool all the people all the time. People will continually struggling for change because it is inherent nature, of human society. More so when we have all what it takes. Look at Nigeria, stupendously rich in oil resources. Less than 1/10 of the oil reserves is being exploited. Gas, we are said to have the 6th largest gas reserve in the world. The gas industry is not even, has not even taken up because they say Nigerians are too poor to afford commercial development of gas. And that means people are destroying the environment through fire, using firewoods, to make fire when we have gas. And they are flaring that to further pollute the environment. When you take the objective and subjective factors together, there is every reason to be confident that change is inevitable. It is coming. It may even be sooner than it is. Because when you study the graph of Africa, from colonialism we had independence. There were illusions in post-independence era. Intelligentsia, middle-class elements were created. And it seems as if people can have upward mobility in terms of social development. It used to be the pattern then. When the few students that came to Europe, America graduated, even when they are asked to stay, they were quick to run back to Africa to aid the development. But we have now exhausted that circle now. We are now in a vicious circle where educated people with 2 degrees, they are emigrating from Africa to come here and become, cab drivers, cleaners, and stuffs like that. I'm not saying there's anything inherently bad in those jobs, but for goodness sake, do we need 2 degrees to become a taxi driver, to come and, just because you are escaping from poverty? But here, they will realize that this is not some kind of wonderland. Economically, they will increasingly find it difficult to find their bearing here. Racially, they can never be integrated here. So the struggle they are running away from, they will realize is the only way forward, to change society. And by the time we get to that kind of situation, more and more people will realize. One good thing is that the very people that constitute the menace to the rest of mankind, humankind, either in the advanced capitalist world or in the neo-colonial society, they constitute such an infinitesimal proportion of the world population. The only reason why they are able to go ahead now is the lack of consciousness of the historical responsibility which the masses have to tackle before they can change society. The more this understanding comes, the easier the task will be. Well, finally, the question asked by the other brother there, that the women protest. As I've said, Niger Delta is the area where most of the revenue accruing to Nigeria comes from, but it's the area where little or nothing is ever given back in terms of development. So out of these desperations, all forms of struggles do take place. For instance, there is a nationality called the Ogoni group. In 1992, 93, 94, 5 period, there was a big, massive movement led by an organization called Ogoni, Movement for the Survival of Ogoni People. Their leaders were Ken Saruwa and others, for those who may remember. Because of the simple crime of mobilizing mass movements against the shell and others, that please give something back out of this stupendous wealth which we are extracting from our society, instead of just giving only, pollution, destroyed agricultural land. The military government, the shell, the military government, prodded by imperialist corporations like Shell, got Ken Saro-Wiwa and co. framed up over a crime which they did not commit. And in the process, 9 Ogoni leaders were executed after a kangaroo trial. The simple reason was to strike fears into the people of the oil-producing area so that they would dare not fight for economic betterment. But as the history of humanity has attested to several times, there is no way repression can stop the people, from fighting for better conditions of life. And that is why up to today you still find one form of protest or the other in the Niger Delta area. Sometimes it takes the form of kidnapping by desperate youth. They kidnap officials of oil companies to extract money to continue living. The one you referred to a few weeks back was a protest made by women. They were going to sack some workers as usual, despite the fact that in most cases, most of the natives of the area where oil is being produced don't get employment, because educationally they are so backward that the multinational corporations' requirements cannot be met by most of these people. So the women demonstrated and threatened. In some cases, they even demonstrated nakedly and threatened to escalate naked demonstration if the oil corporations refuse to acquiesce to their demands. So periodically when that happens, they give some little back. But as I've said, the ultimate challenge facing humanity today is how to overthrow capitalism, replace it with a democratic socialist order. That is the only way you can end poverty in Africa. That is the only way you can end war in this country. You find it disturbing that in this country, government does not want to spend money on education. I've been to a number of colleges and I feel scandalized when I hear the thousands of dollars being paid as school fees. Government is not disturbed. From a socialist point of view, education should be free. Because when you educate citizens, you are only enhancing the quality development of the ultimate society. I've had cause to go to hospitals here, and I realize the invaluable services which these people render to humanity. When you are sick, you require quality training. Yet, to be a medical doctor, the society, the capitalist society, makes it your own personal responsibility. It should not be the case. It should be the problem of society. But you are not going to find the capitalist government in the US spending more money on education or net care. In fact, one constant question they keep asking me, what kind of insurance do I have? And I told them, I have none. Well, fortunately, I was able to get some kind of treatment. But I can imagine millions of people here. If you don't have insurance, you cannot get treatment and things like that. These are the things that government should be spending money on, not wars and armament of destruction. And you can imagine the hypocrisy. The reason why the Bushes of this world want to go to Iraq is they want to go and destroy Saddam's arms of mass destruction. And it's time to logic that they have a higher, superior, weapons of mass destruction before they can be able to destroy the ones that has been produced by their partners in crime. And that is why we need, to organize the workers on an independent basis. In US, for instance, there is the need to create a workers' party that is independent of both the Republicans and the Democrats. In Iraq, for instance, there is the need for an independent party of the working masses that can fight for the economic and democratic rights of the Iraqi poor to overthrow, the repressive government like Saddam. But at the same time, we should not back the Bushes of this world to wage war on Iraq, because when they do, as experience have shown in Afghanistan, the real culprits don't get caught in the foreign exchange. It's the poor people that become the victims. Millions of Iraqi people have been dying annually as a result of the sanctions imposed. Can anybody imagine any relatives of Saddam being involved among those that will die as a result of poverty or lack of proper health care? It's impossible. So that is, and again, if the US goes to Iraq to overthrow Saddam, what type of government are they going to live there, given its antecedents? US imperialism says it's for democracy in the world. Few weeks ago, while I'm in this country, Musharraf, the dictator in Pakistan, was hosted in the White House. So you can see the hypocritical order of imperialism. A country is democratic, even if it is run by a military dictator, once the government is serving the interests of imperialism. Saddam Hussein and Iraq army were built by the US government in the 80s. But because Saddam is against them today, it has become an enemy. Pakistan military dictatorship is serving their interest today, is a friend. This kind of double hypocritical rules cannot bring permanent peace, prosperity in the world. And that is why we are advocating for socialist transformation of the world. And like the Chinese people will say, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a step. Try and register with the socialist alternative in this country today, either for more information or even to take the decisive step of becoming an active member. Then you reinforce, the army of people trying to make a change, because that is the ultimate key. And we are favored, we are fortunate. It's not a question we are not in the world where everybody, faces the same direction. Otherwise, there will be no mass protest in this country. The mere fact that there is mass protest in this country against the society, the genocidal war being planned by the US government against Iraq is a positive testimony that change is possible and inevitable. I thank you for giving me the